Hey Vineyard family, we're so glad you are joining us tonight for our midweek gathering. As you may have noticed, there's a lot going on in our world right now. The church as a whole is beginning to look in the mirror and ask tough questions about racial inequality and what it means to love our neighbors. As Christ followers, we have the opportunity to be agents of change in our world. So tonight, we will have a conversation with Kahlida Lloyd, founder and director of Mission Reconcile, a racial reconciliation organization in New Orleans. Throughout the discussion, I'd encourage you to comment with questions on whatever platform you're using to watch the video. We're so grateful you tuned in. Let's begin the conversation. Really, I'd love to open it up to Kahlida to talk to us about Mission Reconcile, tell us a little bit about her, and again, we're just so glad that you've joined us tonight.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, Ethan, for having me, and Pastor Phil. I'm just really happy, and I'm excited to just kind of sit down in this moment and have a conversation and just exchange listening and hearing and what that can look like. So like you said, my name is Kahlida Lloyd. I am the founder of Mission Reconcile. But before I was the founder of Mission Reconcile, I've been a daughter, a sister, and all these different things, but also an attorney in practice. I practiced for a little bit and still continue to do that, and also run and lead Mission Reconcile. And so Mission Reconcile was birthed and started a little bit over 2 years ago now. Maybe we're in our third year, October of 2017. With a call to really engage with churches when it comes to this concept of racial reconciliation. I was living in DC in 2016 and 2017 and really got an unctioning from God of what are you calling me to do? And it was connected to churches. And it was right about when, and it's funny because it was right about when Black Lives Matter kind of started and erupted. And I just recognized that the church was silent and the church was not speaking in a way that I just know the church to be powerful at. Faith has been something that's been rooted in my upbringing. I've been a Christian and walking in the walk and a believer and have always been in church and a member of the church and involved in my church. And for that moment when this justice and this thing in the world, if you will, was erupting, I saw that my church wasn't responding. And this place that I had grew up in and loved didn't have a voice in something that I thought was so important to have a voice in. And not just because it was me and I felt it, I saw it even more. I just felt like that was me and that was a place that the church could be a part of. But I didn't see it. And so God just continued to work in me and flesh out what this thing was called Mission Reconcile came to birth. And so the idea is, how do we bring our faith and so our beliefs, our principles, our desires, and what we're just rooted in, our foundations, how do we bring that together in this thing called justice and this thing called reconciliation and this thing called loving our neighbor? How do we really bring that alive and make it like an action? Even in many ways, just a conversation. Let's just like be aware of it. And so Mission Reconcile is a faith-based racial reconciliation nonprofit, and we were created to bring together predominantly single race churches. So like a predominantly Black church, a predominantly white church, to talk about race, racism, create organic relationships within that. And so what I also saw was there's a lot of homogenous churches. And that's just where we are. That's just how history has played out. And we just have to recognize as a church that it's played out within our faith. And there's still segregation when it comes to that. And so one of our cornerstone quotes is Martin Luther King's quote of the most segregated hour on a Sunday morning is at 11 o'clock. And what that represents is, we're still homogenous in our being. And so what does that mean for how we've been able to advance justice as brothers and sisters in Christ? If on Sundays and Wednesdays and all the other days that we gather, we're gathering with those that don't look like us, don't believe like us, don't think like us, but still have this root and this guidance of our faith. And so I developed Mission Reconcile as an opportunity to engage with churches, and it allowed churches to engage with one another. And so, yeah.
So, Kahlida, you don't know me that well, but I'm a man of many, many, many words. And today I'm going to try to use less words and listen more. But what you said there already has stirred me. And I wonder, from your standpoint, you were in a church. Was it predominantly a Black church at the time?
Yeah, so that was kind of the funny part about it too. I grew up in a predominantly Black church. And so I grew up originally in Miami, Florida, and grew up in a predominantly Black church, a Baptist church, missionary Baptist, and brought up in that. And I think for a stint of time, we went to an AME church as well, African Methodist Episcopal Church. But very much, I can remember my pastor right now, really just helped me to engage in being rooted in my Christian faith, right? And so when I went off to college, I just remember that about that pastor. But I continued to worship in predominantly Black churches. I went to a Baptist church in college. I went to college at Florida State University in Tallahassee, Florida. Go Seminoles.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, right. Being in New Orleans now in like LSU territory is quite interesting. But after that, I went to another predominantly Black church when I was in law school in North Carolina. And we call North Carolina the Bible Belt. And so that was just interesting experience. And in DC, where Mission Reconcile started, I've been a couple places in between that. But in DC, where Mission Reconcile started, I was at a very progressive, I would say predominantly white church, but very progressive. And so it's called National Community Church. And yeah, I just discovered so many things. And I think that's just beautiful within it, that, you know, God will place me in that place and do many things. But yeah, they have been just really a foundation, and really have embraced what it is to just have the conversation. Not perfect, but just embrace that. And so
that's really interesting to me because, you know, in these last weeks, of course, I'm only seeing it through my eyes, and I'm seeing a lot of predominantly white churches at least talking about things. And it's like, so my question is, I would imagine this is going to go over to the Black church too, but why is it so hard to talk about these issues, whether it's a white church or a Black church? What is it about the issue of race that, you know, it's like people always say, hey, don't talk about God and politics. But in the church, we say, don't talk about money and don't talk about race.
yeah.
But why? You know, I mean, I have some thoughts, but I'd like to hear yours first. Because it's a big question. Why is that so difficult? Why do we struggle with that?
Yeah, I definitely want to hear your thoughts,
Oh.
for sure. But in just doing this work, the struggle has been for me personally, because I'm just so rooted in my faith, and I'm such a believer in this this gospel, right? And what it represents is, I feel like I've been persuading to have conversations that affect our neighbors, that affect our brothers and sisters. And I think it's hard for the church because of our history. I think we have not addressed. I think we have not had deep conversations about how the church has started in America, and addressing kind of the first sin, which is what I call it, is racism, and what that means, how that's trickled into the church. And I think we just haven't addressed it. And when you don't address something, you definitely can't have a conversation about it. And you definitely can't do anything about it. And you definitely can't act on it. And so I think it's an acknowledgement that we as a body, like a holistic body, haven't acknowledged and recognized in order to even go deeper. But I think that's a bigger question for pastors and leaders and, you know, you all, of why that has been, and I don't even think it's been intentional, right? I don't even think that it's been intentional of not speaking on it. But but I think it has been a hindrance.
I would agree. I don't think it's intentional, at least not for most folks. I guess you really have to take this back historically, because we are the product, we're the sum total of all those who went before us. And if that wasn't an issue that was brought up then we weren't trained to talk about it, and we were not equipped to talk about it. We don't even see it. Many of us don't, especially in the white community, because the white community started this country on the backs of basically racist, even theology, like other human beings. Native Indians, they're not really human beings, so you can do what you need to do. I hate even saying those words because I never learned that in school. I mean, at least not from with a perspective of racism. It was even taught in school as though, well, this is in fact, even taught in the church that this was the promised land and we should just take it and that sort of thing. And that just scares me to death these days. But here's what I was going to say. I'm sorry, I'm rambling now, but I think that we have lost, maybe black church and white church, we have lost half the gospel. We say that the cross was about reconciling man to God, but what about the part of reconciling humans to each other and to creation? We just don't talk about that much, and yet that's as much as what Jesus did on the cross as anything else.
Yeah.
And that other part's a little bit uncomfortable, I think. I'm guessing here. It's been uncomfortable because that's never been part of our history to really, in any major way, address the divide.
Yeah. I think when we gather and we meet with clergy and I sit down, it's almost re-dissecting and reinterpreting 2 Corinthians 5, right? The ministry of reconciliation. The churches and leaders have gotten that we're going to make disciples and we're going to bring people to Jesus and reconcile people to God through Jesus. But then there's like this bottom part that talks about how we reconcile. We're called to reconcile to one another. And the only way that we can bring other people to Jesus is if we're in relationship with them.
Yeah.
Right. Even if that relationship is 2 seconds, right? You meet somebody and you interact with them, you tell them about Jesus, and then they come to faith. Like, that's how people come to know Jesus. And if we don't figure out how we can engage everyone to come to Jesus, then we're not going to be bringing people to the gospel. We're not going to be bringing people to know Christ. And this division has impeded the ability to really preach the gospel and really be able to bring people in, from young people to older people, to those who want to have these conversations that are affecting them, but they don't see an opportunity to dig deep in their faith, in their churches, with other people who call themselves Christians, all these different things. And so it's almost a stumbling blocks if we don't address it to what our, bigger mission, quote unquote, is.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So, when we speak like this, I know for years I just would resort to, and not with any malice, just cliches. I mean, well, they weren't even a cliche. It was the truth. Like I have been known to say, I'm not racist. I have black friends. I don't do that kind of racist stuff. I try to see everybody as the same, not just, there's one human race and it's not just about our color. But that I've come to realize that falls so short. Because I think, help me with this, I think what I'm doing is defending my own space, my own self at that point. But I get lost on this thing that's being touted a lot today, systemic racism. And I haven't really understood that. How would you help me and others understand systemic racism as opposed to just my own personal either overt racism or my lack of it? There's still something there that is affecting a whole people group that's very, very bad, very damaging.
Yeah. So when we talk about conversations and talk about systemic and structural racism, which are two words that I use interchangeably, we begin to look at institutions. And so it's one thing to address kind of your personal thoughts and beliefs and biases and how you were raised and looking at your history on a personal level. And then those same people who are looking at that and doing that are part of institutions. So are part of the education system, are part of the healthcare system, are part of our political system, are part of our religious systems, are part of what's another system? Our housing system. See, all these different things that affect us. So our basic needs, everything has a system and a structure to involve it, even our religion, right? And so those same people then make those systems. And then those systems affect other people in different ways. So that's when we begin to talk about equity. We then become talk about racism. And so when we talk about systemic and structural racism, it's the conglomerate, if you will, of all people working to advance a thing. And so if you have a majority of people in a thinking that is based on white supremacy or rooted in racism or based in a superior, inferior type of structure, you're going to have results that are affecting other people differently. And then that's what we call systemic racism. That's when the whole system needs an overhaul and not just that individual person. But what I always want to encourage people with, because that sounds really daunting, is like, how do I change the system?
Yeah, right.
And we can't, right? Not just you, not just me, not just you, not just Ethan. And so what that means is we make up the systems though. You know, we're the leaders of the things. We're the leaders of those structures. And so each one teach one. And so what can you do within your spheres of influence? So whatever system you're in, whatever seat you're at, whatever table, and we all have just different levels. That's just the bottom line. And so what can we do within those different systems personally in order to advance what we're trying to go forward on? And so I try to help people by saying, I know it's this big system and this big structure that you're a part of, but how can you impact that structure in your individual capacity? And so that makes it a little bit easier, I think. And you don't have to go around and feel like you have to change the whole entire system. But if we use, say, the criminal justice system as an example, there are so many different entities that affect the criminal justice system, from law enforcement to attorneys, the prosecutor's office, to judges, to jails. All these different systems make up the criminal justice system. And if we dissect every single one, there's lots of work to do. But there's a leader in every single one, right? There's a leader in the law enforcement. There's a leader amongst judges. A judge is a leader within their own right. And so what can we do to individually change so that wherever we are, we can affect it in a positive way? And so that takes learning, that takes education, that takes acknowledgement that these systems are broken, and that they're affecting people differently. And so, yeah, that's in a nutshell.
No, that's great. Ethan, anything you wanted to add there? I thought that was very powerful there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's super, super helpful, Kahlida. And I think maybe what's freeing about that too is I think so many times, like Phil, to go back to your last point, like I think as white folks, sometimes we're like, hey, I'm not the person standing on the corner yelling racial stuff at people, you know, like I'm not the one that's has this overt racism here. And even we can kind of look at specific people and say, well, hey, that specific person is racist, but then we disconnect it from the actual system, where really I like to think that all people are made in the image of God. All people have have really been victims of these structures and these systems. So even maybe some of the folks that are stuck in these structures and systems, we can still see the image of God in them, and then almost refer to those structures as principalities and systems, like we talk about, that are things that the Spirit needs to come in and do work. And we can still see people trapped in that. And so hopefully the liberation part is for all people, not just for the oppressed, but also for people who are oppressing as well.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because what we have to realize is that we're all in this together. And so one affects the other. And so this is not just structural racism against one group. This is something that's embedded in all of us in some type of way, and it's manifesting in these institutions and in these systems. And so it does us all a great service that those things that are broken are fixed, right? And those things that are broken and that are not serving our brothers and sisters well is something that we pay attention to and recognize. I also don't want to make it seem like this is easy, right? Because even if you're that one person who's ready to stand up and say, this is something that I believe in and this is not right and I want to use my influence, like you just said, there's principalities. There are things in high places that we cannot even fathom. And so that's where I believe, and that's why I'm so passionate about Mission Reconcile and what we can do as a church. That's where I believe our faith comes in. And that's where I believe that this Jesus and this power that we believe in, that if we all tapped into it in a unified way, like God will show up and God will show out in terms of making change and giving the progress that we need and seeing this heaven on earth. And so I think we're just not unified in our efforts, if you will. And so the more we have, the better. And it's just that it takes just that one though within yourself.
Well, yeah. I mean, from my own experience, I just it's taken a while to see, and maybe because we just were not really willing to look, or even knew that we needed to look. I mean, I think most people feel like they got it pretty much together. They understand how the world works, and everything's fine as long as you're not the one who's being the oppressed in some way. So what I think, and maybe you can help with this, but one of the largest problems for me in talking about this is that I seem to put so many people on the defensive because they immediately feel like all we're saying is it's your fault. And then we come back to that thing, well, I didn't do this and I didn't do that. How do you help people like me realize that we're a part of the problem, even if it's not us directly? We're just part of the system, and we have been. How do you help people come to grips with the facts of, well, let's just use the words white privilege? We equate white supremacy with white privilege. I don't think they're the same thing at all. Not necessarily. I think one might come out of the other. But how do you communicate with people to even get them to a place where you want to think this through without being so defensive and offended? Did that make any sense at all?
Yeah, I think so. So I think we have to, in order to really have this conversation and be, just acknowledge kind of where we are, there's some terms and there's some language that will be new to us. And one of those terms and those languages are white privilege, white supremacy, and they kind of get thrown around, if you will. And they are defensive words just naturally, because that's what the enemy does, right? The enemy does things to warp things that can really empower us and set us free. And the enemy warps the truth. And so it's a natural thing that people are defensive. But that's when it goes back to our faith of like, okay, why am I being defensive about this? What is truly the truth in this? And so the thing that I like to do about white privilege and just kind of explaining that word is I use myself for an example. And I tell people, like, I like privilege. I think privilege is absolutely wonderful. Give me privilege all day. And the reason for that is that's a good thing. Like, privilege is a good thing. But the thing about it is, what do we do with our privilege is what is the shift, and what is actually the real result. And so I use myself for an example, which is I'm an attorney by profession. And when I tell people I'm an attorney, you automatically trust me. You automatically feel that I'm trustworthy in every way. You think I'm automatically smart. Don't get it twisted. I'm all of those things. I'm trustworthy, I'm smart, all of those things. But it's automatic. I didn't have to tell you anything about what school I went to. I didn't have to tell you that I even graduated. I could have not graduated in any percentage of the class. But because I said that, you automatically have things that you, characteristics that you attribute to me automatically without me having to prove anything, establish anything, none of that. And so that is not a bad thing. Like, I want you to believe those things about me. And they are in fact true. And so that is fine. But what do I do with that privilege of that trust that you have instilled in me, that value of my intelligence? What am I going to do with that? Am I going to use it for good, or am I going to use it for evil? And then the next thing is, what am I going to think? I want to also add, what am I going to think about that privilege? Am I going to think that I'm superior than you because I'm an attorney and you're not? Or even if I'm talking to another attorney, I practice in this area and they don't. How do I think about that privilege is also like another important part. And so I translate that to white privilege. You know, it's a good thing. Let's embrace it. Let's acknowledge it. Let's call it what it is and embrace it. But let's just determine how we're going to actually use it in order to advance things like justice, advance things like equity, advance things like inclusion, right? That has been on the sidelines of our brothers and sisters, and that hasn't felt well with them. And so how are we going to use that in terms of our influence? And so there's automatic things that and we go into the extreme of white male privilege, right, is the extreme. And so how can you use that, though, in order to advance the things that are affecting the other, right? Affecting the least of these, those are oppressed, and thereby giving glory to the privilege that you've been given, essentially. And then what do you think about that privilege? How do you think about that privilege? And are you walking in a superior type of way in that privilege? Or are you walking in the privilege of humility and service and graciousness, and in a spirit of learning and understanding how I can do well with this privilege? How can I steward this privilege well? And so I think if we just begin to speak the truth about these terms, we begin to see it in a different light, and then can use it to God's glory, to the benefit of our brothers and sisters, and actually change this world because our faith calls us to. And then we can have a whole nother conversation about like all the other terms, but that's really just kind of a big one that I land on, that I feel can catch people up a little bit, but it's a good thing. But it's only good if you use it well and steward it well, and use it in order to advance the things that are affecting the other.
That all sounds very Christ-like. I mean, really, that was good. I like the way you said that. Let's just go ahead and accept it, but what are we going to do with it? That's a challenging question. Thank you for that. I like that. Here's another. It's almost predictable, the things that happen when we go through an event like the murder of George Floyd, but the protest, which I totally understand and get. I mean, people are trying to be heard, and then subsequent riotous activity or looting, and we always, a lot of people try to go right to that, and now you're no longer talking about the real issue. And now it's even gotten to the place where everybody wants to get rid of the police. And how can you, that just seems kind of crazy. I don't know how we can actually get rid of law and order, but it sure needs to be changed. So is it possible to go after something that is so evil as like police brutality without being anti-police?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it almost feels, does it feel like that to y'all? It feels like it goes to an extreme. Every reaction goes to an extreme when maybe the solution is somewhere in between. I don't, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's definitely a balance of both, right? So I start this conversation off with my brother is a police officer. And he's been in the military before and on all those different things. And I've had conversations with him about, before this has even erupted, about what is it? Like, what's going on over there with y'all? Because he's in a sphere of influence, right? Like he's in that system. And what does it look like to engage in that way? And so we've had a conversation about that. And there's plenty of things, right? In every profession, everyone's not great. But what we have to understand, though, that there's systemic situations, right? And so these are not just one-off things. So you have to ask yourself, what is going on with the system at that point? And so I think that is the root of police brutality and dealing with that. This has been something that is ongoing. It's not just one person did this, another person did this. This is a trend. And so at that point, you have to ask yourself, why is there a trend? What is going on? And address the things going on in the system. And so that's just one thing that hasn't happened. There's been lots of initiatives and things being said, but I think George Floyd, this incident was like the camel that broke the straw that broke the camel's back, right? Yeah. And it's like, you've got to respond now and really begin solutions and looking at what that is. And so that's a whole nother conversation of like, what's the actual solution? And then on the other side is the solution isn't get rid of everybody. The solution could be get rid of everybody and start over. That could be a solution, but it's not dismantle the whole thing, right? But I think the root of that answer is we give all this money and this funding for the things that are not advancing us, but we don't give it to the things that would. And that's where equity comes in. And that's where just talking about the things that really are the solutions. And so why are the police in certain areas and they're not, right? What is the economic and what is the education of that area? And so what if we funded those areas? What if we funded that education system in that area that the police are policing? What if we funded the grocery store down the corner so that healthy food can be given? What if we revitalize a neighborhood and not kicked out everybody? Hashtag gentrification. What if those things were the solution instead of instead of giving money to the things that are not causing? And so I think the opportunity is to look at the root of the ask, right? And then see what is a good balance and what is a good compromise. Because I agree, we don't want to get rid of law enforcement officers. I think my brother is a fine police officer, and I think he should keep his job, and I think he should serve in just a beautiful way. But at the same time, we have to realize what is the root of our issues, and where are we giving our monies, where are we giving our dollars, where are we giving our attention to, and where is that attention positive or is that attention negative? So I think it's an invitation to figure out the root of the ask. And so when someone's like absurd of a question, just step back and say, okay, what is the root of their ask though? What is it? Because it's out of frustration. Like, we've been here, we've done that. Part of the thing that has been a little frustrating for me is now you get it. Now you understand, and thank God, but okay. We're here at that moment. So what does that mean though? And just really looking at the root of the ask, I think is something that would be helpful.
Yes, that's very helpful. It's overwhelming, isn't it? It's overwhelming.
Mhm.
It seems like a daunting task. It seems almost impossible when you think about all the different systems that are really governed by powers and principalities, people who are influenced by powers and principalities. So I'm encouraged, though, because if the church begins to talk about these things instead of just doing half the gospel,
Mhm.
but not reconciling man to man, the more churches that talk about it, the more disciples will be made in the image of Christ, and the whole gospel will be preached. And those people, through the systems they're a part of, can actually affect some change. But it seems like we've been going into the systems where we work with one hand tied behind our back
Mhm.
because of the inability to even talk about it. And it may take some time, but if we as pastors and church leaders, if we continue talking and making disciples to truly follow Christ, then we will never be content within those systems without trying to bring forth some change.
Mhm.
So, I don't know that it's going to be a top-down thing, because maybe the top-down people are so influenced by powers and principalities, they like it the way it is.
Mhm.
But if it comes up from the bottom and it's going to do it that way, it's going to happen with the church first. We have to make
Mhm.
a disciple that understands and gets this, and will go out and live differently.
It's funny you say that because I believe it's an everybody thing, right? I think leadership matters, and that is very important. But it is, you're influenced. And just this morning, I was thinking about, since we're in the Pentecost season, I was just thinking about how Jesus was crucified. And Pontius Pilate said, he went to the people. He brought up this barbarian. I don't know how you describe it, but it was Jesus and this other person who was like vicious.
Yeah, he was a
Um,
murderer.
right, right. And so Pontius Pilate was like, who do you want? Who do you want to crucify? Jesus or the murderer? And literally, the people were like, Jesus, crucify Jesus. And Pontius Pilate was like, you sure? Like, that's what y'all want to do with the decision that I'm entrusting in you? And, I'm ad-libbing, right? But it was because of the people that Pontius Pilate made this decision. He was the ultimate decision maker,
Mhm.
but the people is who he went with.
Sure.
And so I was like, wow, it just kind of dropped in me. And I was just like, we're the people, right? We're the people who are going to stir up. And I think that's the reasons for the protest. I think that's the reason for the outrage, is because if as people, and that's just practical, I don't even think it's a bad thing. But as people, if we come together, unify under one voice and one ask and one initiative and come together, we'll see the right answer happen. We'll see the change. We'll see what needs to happen. But it was the people, and
Yeah.
we're the people, and so.
Well,
So good. Well, I feel like this has been a great conversation starter for us.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so we're going to, again, ask our folks to send some more questions our way, and we'll do a follow-up with you soon. But this has been very, very helpful. Been helpful for me. So
Yeah.
appreciate you so much.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you're interested in continuing dialogue, we plan to have a follow-up with Kahlida in the coming weeks to answer some of your questions. Now, you can comment your questions on social media or send them to me below. We'll also provide some practical next steps and resources for the journey. Now, if you're feeling a little overwhelmed, know this: the process of racial reconciliation isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. We are all in process together, listening to the Spirit as we strive to be more like Jesus in our world. I'd like to leave you with this. In Luke chapter 4, Jesus opens the scroll of the prophet Isaiah and gives a glimpse of what his work in the world will look like. I think it's a timely invitation for us today in the moment that we're in. The Spirit of the Lord is upon us, for he has anointed us to bring good news to the poor. He has sent us to proclaim that captives will be released, that the blind will see, that the oppressed will be set free, and that the time of the Lord's favor has come. Amen. Have a great night, and we'll see you on Sunday.